Hi, this is I'm.
Once you know it's for real,
I know.
you're like,
Okay, let's stop. Hi, I'm Kirsten Jones,
and I'm Susie Walton.
and this is our podcast. Hashtag Raising Athletes with Kirsten and Susie.
Our passion is supporting parents and raising not only strong athletes, but extraordinary people.
Join us each week as we tackle all topics youth sports, including everything from early specialization and overuse injuries
to helping our kids feel empowered and learn how to advocate for themselves, not only in the classroom and on the court, but at dinner tables and in their communities.
We'll be talking to coaches, athletes, parents,
and anyone else who will speak to us
about their experiences with youth sports and their paths to success.
And even more importantly, their failures. Yes, we're going to get into the gritty details of what went wrong so that we can all learn from it. Teach our kids
and ourselves
how to do better next time.
Because in the words of Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. So welcome to Raising Athletes, because we love to win too.
Let's do this.
Hello, welcome to the Raising Athletes podcast. My name is Kirsten Jones. I'm a peak performance and sports parenting coach and a newly minted author just a couple months into it of Raising Empowered Athletes. How do we raise not only strong athletes, but extraordinary people? Susie and I have been doing the podcast for 5 years now, where we love talking to other leaders, parents, authors about everything youth sports. And our guest today is a perfect connection because, as we know, we're not just raising athletes, we're trying to raise good kids. And we need tools as parents to help them do that. Dr. Devorah Heitner is the author of Growing Up in Public, Coming of Age in a Digital World, and Screenwise, Helping Kids Thrive and Survive in Their Digital World. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Atlantic. She has a Ph.D. in Media and Technology and Society from Northwestern University and is taught at DePaul University and Northwestern. She is delighted to be raising her own teenager, and she lives with her family in Chicago. You can follow her on Instagram and join her email list for her free SOS guide, but we'll get into all of that. First, welcome, Devorah. Thank you so much for making the time to be here.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have other authors talking about like-minded things, and this is such a huge topic right now. I know you've been out speaking in the world, all over the United States. Tell us about how this book came about for you.
So I've been out in the world talking about my last book, Screenwise, and kind of helping parents understand kids and screens really for over a decade. And there's just so much anxiety, and, it's a quickly moving topic. Things keep changing. Even if you have older kids, sometimes your younger kids are using different apps or, want something at a younger age. So, and of course, each kid is unique and special. And so it really is kind of a quickly moving space. And a lot of parents were nervous about their kids going viral for the wrong reasons and becoming known for things you wouldn't want to be known for. We all grew up without the pressure of having our lives videotaped and photographed so much and shared. So I wrote Growing Up in Public to try to understand the ways tweens and teens are dealing with being so public, being shared, sharing one another, being so exposed, and how parents can help kids navigate that and also reduce some parental anxiety, hopefully, around these things.
What age do you recommend? I do have some clients and friends who have younger kids. What ages are you seeing are the national norms of kids not only having, a lot of parents have the family iPad, but what ages are they getting a phone?
I mean, if you look at the Pew Center for Internet and American Life, in a lot of communities, kids are pretty young, like 10 or 11. And of course, you hear anecdotally about 8-year-olds with phones and even 6-year-olds. That doesn't mean that has to be your kid. And furthermore, it doesn't mean your kid has to have 24/7 access to the latest, greatest phone that does all the things. There's all kinds of middle ground. Nobody really wants a flip phone at this point, but you can get a kind of a stripped down phone as a starter phone or a watch. I think the tricky thing is people then feel like they have to then communicate with their kids a lot, like if they have a watch and all of that. So just think any of them, any communication device that you walk around with all day is a big deal to think about. And you want to think about what are the freedoms my kid currently enjoys if they don't have a phone yet, to be unplugged and be untethered, versus some of the maybe additional safety or peace of mind that you might think comes with a phone. But of course, it also comes with a lot of needed skills and a lot of potential for challenge. So I think there's a lot of upsides and downsides to starting with the phone really at any age.
So when you give your kid a phone, I mean, I think one of the biggest parenting advices we have is modeling the behavior. What advice do you have for parents on how to model the behaviors that you want your kids to have with good phone or media usage?
I mean, you just want to be thoughtful about your own use, obviously not texting and driving. If you're a frequent sports spectator parent, ideally you're not on your phone doing other things while your kid is playing, and you're not photographing your kid or videotaping your kid without permission. I think for a lot of our kids who perform, whether it's athletics or performing arts, the temptation is like this whole incredible gymnastics routine or volleyball, moment should be online. And I think that raises some really important questions like, did your kid say that was okay? Is that putting pressure on your kid? Do you even want to open that door? So these are some questions we need to ask ourselves, and we need to model kind of thoughtful use. How would you feel if someone was videotaping and sharing your performance at work, for example? I have a whole chapter in Growing Up in Public called Sharenting that I did not coin that term, by the way, but it is a genius term. Oh. And a lot of us are sharing our kids, and we just need to think about, like, for whom am I doing this? Who is benefiting from this? Even if my friends or my parents, for example, love to see this, like maybe I can just make some photos just for the grandparents. Like maybe I don't need to share as widely. Like if you look at your own community, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or wherever you're sharing your kids, if you are sharing them, there's probably a mix of like college friends and old colleagues. And, it might not everyone there actually like wants to see your kid score the winning goal. I mean, as much as you do. And sometimes if we're videotaping something, we may not be as focused on actually just enjoying it. So I get the urge to take pictures, but especially if you have a kid who's playing a lot of sports, there may be professional pictures here and there, and you can enjoy those for the family album or for memories or whatever. And, if you can enjoy the game without feeling like you need to document it, you might feel actually like you're more present and connected.
I kind of have that issue. I remember feeling, and now that I look back, every once in a while, a memory will pop up that somebody else posted that tagged me in, because I think I'm a horrible parent. I didn't videotape any of this, but I do kind of feel that way. Like I want them to have the experience, and I want to be there to enjoy it. But it is, I think, a hard balance, because I know there are parents. In fact, I was giving a talk just last week, and one of the moms asked that for her 11-year-old, one of the dads had already downloaded this app that actually would track, you could go back and look at how many, wins, every single play of every single athlete. And you can't say that's for recruiting. That was, nobody's recruiting an 11-year-old. And the mom was getting very stressed about the fact that this dad was getting all the stats of every kid, and then they were going to go back and watch it after. And how do you navigate those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think facial recognition is changing the whole game, again. And I don't really have an easy answer, because a lot of times our kids might be photographed, by their martial arts studio or by the team. And I think we have to make decisions, and it's hard. I mean, certainly if your kid is aiming for very intense life in sports and competition, there's a public aspect to that, or some competitions or games may be open to the public, and it's hard to sort of be under the radar. But I think the younger our kids are, the more important it is to kind of protect them from that. And even when they're older, I think we need to give kids choices and ways of opting out of certain things, like, because you see these moments, or also like, I mean, the uncomfortable thing for me is when you see like a parent gone sort of wrong in the stands, or a kid like fouling another kid, or, something that you might like want to kind of move on from. And it's like, or a mistake in the sport, but especially those like negative interpersonal moments, you don't really want to keep that around forever. You want to learn from it and move forward.
Yeah. So talking about, documenting things. And I was just talking to a friend yesterday whose daughter's getting recruited. And she said she was so shocked when the daughter talked to the coach. The coach said, "Oh, well, I saw that you went to Costa Rica last summer. How was your trip?" So obviously he was on her Instagram feed checking out what she was doing, right? So awareness of when you're getting recruited, even, and I tell all of my clients that, whatever you think you're putting on, and we used to talk about the newspaper, what would be shared on the front page of the newspaper, but that's now their social media feed, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I talk a lot in the book about how in general colleges don't look at things like where you went on vacation last summer, but I do think athletic recruitment is a little bit of an exception to that. There may be a deeper dive, especially
Let's
if you've
talk about
shared your social. I mean, I would be pretty surprised if he found her social independently, actually. Like, I think she probably shared her handle at some point, because if he went through hoops to find her social, that would be surprising and a little invasive to me.
I think what they make them do on these recruiting websites is list all of their handles. So yeah, anytime you share what your handle is, they're going to go look at it. And I always tell kids, you got to be careful what you're sharing, and they will. And I've had college coaches tell me that they'll go out of their way to not only check out yours, but they'll check out the parents too, because they want to see what they're dealing with before they bring somebody into their program. Because I'm not going to deal with crazy for the next 4 years. And if you're doing that, organically, then that's not something we want.
I hear that. In general, I just want to say, and this is true for most parents of most kids, including a lot of kids who are athletes, but are maybe not, I don't know, like D1, D2 recruits. Like, I don't think you're in that situation overall. Like, I just want to reduce the hysteria a little bit around it. Like, most kids are not getting a deep dive into their social as part of the admissions process. If your kid applies to your flagship state university, there are so many thousands of kids, and the admissions team has 5 minutes with each file, if that. So there's not let's spend, forensically facial recognition. It's just not that creepy. That said, yeah, if you're up for a scholarship and they're looking at, investing in you and making you the public face of that university, that's a little bit different. And it makes sense that they would go a little deeper. But I just want to reduce the worry a little bit. If your kid is I want to play intramural, ultimate Frisbee at their college, that's not the kid who's going to get the deep dive on their social.
Yeah, no, this is more, I think, recruited athletes. So D1,
yeah.
D2,
No, if there's money involved,
yeah.
It's when there's money involved. If there's money involved.
Yeah.
If there's no money involved, then, and again, that's not giving kids license to mess up. I just want to be really clear that the reason we want our kids to be good people online is not just so they don't get caught. It's really about being a good person, so you're in alignment with who you are. Your kid doesn't want to seem like a nasty teammate or a bad friend or an unkind roommate or a negative classmate. And I think it's important for them to understand that they're being seen and potentially judged in their own community. It's not just college. It's not just sort of the future, if you will. But yeah, I think there is a higher level of scrutiny when there's money involved, always.
And I think it's hard. I mean, we talked about this before, where their frontal lobe is so wide open. So their instant gratification, they're making decisions in the moment that we would have made, but wouldn't have been splashed everywhere. And now they make a decision that at the moment they thought was funny, or the moment they thought, what could it hurt? And it can become very consequential, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the good side of it is the sometimes negative things that happened are more exposed now, like hazing and other things are, we have seen at my university at Northwestern and so many other places that these things get exposed. And I think kids are, and young people, young adults in college, not really kids anymore, but are learning that they can come forward and that they don't have to accept that kind of experience.
Yeah. So let's talk about mental health. So that gets into the balancing and setting boundaries and navigating, these, again, they're getting, I think, a lot of good things where they're getting exposure to sexuality and experiences with racism and Me Too and all of those things. How do we help our kids navigate all of that to make sure that they're, again, representing who they truly are and who we want them to be, or we think they are?
Yeah, I think it's really important because, again, young people in general, go through all kinds of experiences where they're trying to figure out who they are. And that's actually part of the work of adolescence and of growing up, right? That is part of what growing up is figuring out who you are and how much do you identify with your family of origin? How do you identify with your ethnicity? How do you identify with your gender presentation? And I think all of these questions are kind of at the forefront. Like, I get really excited. I've seen many students in my own community testify at school board meetings recently. So like the girls swim team was testifying about, the pool and how problematic their small spaces and how it's not safe. Like you have like divers going over swimmers and, situations that aren't safe. And then I also saw the Middle East North African students and the Black and African American students and other groups representing other different identities, like get up at different times in these different meetings in the last few months and speak about their identity. And I think that's a situation where we should be really proud of young people for doing that. And I think social media is one of the places kids are learning to do that, learning to organize. And whether it's around, advocating for a specific change, like a larger pool, whether it's about advocating for a change in coursework or changing the way schools are policed, whether there should be police officers in schools. I think young people are really sticking up for and making demanding changes in a positive way. So I think that's one of the things adults can really learn from seeing and observing how young people are using social media.
How do we mentor them to make sure that because again, this cancel culture, that they don't post something that is offensive to someone? What are the tools that they need to know and when they're thinking about posting?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about, will people get the wrong idea about what kind of friend I am, what kind of human I am? And could this hurt someone is a question we always need to ask before we post. And if in doubt, don't share it out. If you think liking something and kids do need to understand liking something or amplifying something, even if someone else has said it, resharing something that someone else wrote is still amplifying it, right? So you're still using your power and sharing it with your network. So a lot of kids feel like they're just kind of passively and blamelessly sharing stuff. And I think adults do this too, where they're like, well, I didn't write that meme. I'm like, yeah, but you liked it, So you want to make sure you're not voting for something that is problematic. And especially with kids younger, like middle school kids, sometimes they just don't get why it's funny. And they're like, oh, this is outrageous, I'll share it. And, if in doubt, don't share it out. If you don't know what something means, don't share it out. Don't like it, right? If you're not sure why it's funny, but it could be at someone else's expense, like that's not something you want to play around with.
So for how long or to what age do you feel like parents should be monitoring their kids' social media feed?
I mean, I think ideally parents are mentoring and not just monitoring, and maybe they're not monitoring the social media feed at all, because I think that can become a very slippery slope and kids can really lean into going underground and being more secretive. So I think especially if kids are, 13 and up and they're sort of quote unquote old enough to be on social media, and that's only based on some very loose rules, or if your family has decided, it's okay for your kid to be on a specific app, whatever that app might be, then talking with them about the ways that app is used, checking in with them about how they feel about that app in relation to mental health and comparison and, sort of social experiences, but not leaning into, trying to track every move they make on that app or read every text and direct message. Certainly talking to kids about the ways that, so many of the girls that I talked to had experienced sexual harassment online. Some of the boys had as well. It's almost a universal for girls, unfortunately, which is disgusting, of course. And I find it really scary, but girls will tell me about getting really creepy and inappropriate direct messages on Instagram or other apps. So we need to talk to kids of all genders about how to behave appropriately with others, but also what you can do. Blocking people, reporting it if you know the person, maybe changing your settings and emphasizing that it's not your fault. Like nobody should feel like, oh, I had the wrong setting, so it's my fault that I was sexually harassed. But on the other hand, like, yes, there are measures you can take that make it a little harder for, creepy people to contact you, but that doesn't mean that it's okay that that happens. So I want to really be clear with kids, like, hey, this isn't your fault. Some people are really misusing this technology, right? And again, a kid who is more out there in public is also more vulnerable in these ways. So we have to make sure we're really coaching them, kind of early and often.
And what about in personal relationships where they're texting one another or snapping one another as they do, and it gets carried away into sexting? Can you talk about sexting and kind of how that's evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole chapter in Growing Up in Public about sexting, and it's super interesting, right? So you see in high school and college and beyond for some kids in relationships and young people and young adults too, and even older adults, this is part of their relationships. So you have to decide as a parent, like, what are you concerned about? What you really want to know ultimately, in addition to the legal issues, because I'm sure some of your listeners are attorneys and they're going to be like, or, police officers or somebody, and they're going to be like, it's illegal. Yes, it's true. If you're under 18, sending a nude picture is against the law. And most kids experience social risks and privacy risks and maybe safety risks before they experience legal risks. And that's a good thing, especially if we're talking about consensual sexting, right? Like, I don't want to see two 16-year-olds in love go to jail or pay heavy fines for sending each other nudes. I would look at that in the same light I would look at them doing any other, sexual things together, which is like, is it consensual? Did they keep it private? Were they safe? Right? You might or might not think it's ideal for kids to be sexually active in any ways, but looking at the data, kids are actually delaying a lot of sexual activity until older ages than previous generations, i.e. you adults listening, if it wasn't you, maybe great, maybe you waited until marriage or until you were 35 or whatever, but kids today are actually waiting longer to start a lot of intimate in-person sexual activities. So on the other hand, sexting seems so easy and seems, it's like something that seems low risk in some ways to kids in their minds. And we, of course, as adults think about the privacy and social risks as well as, legal risks. So we have to help them kind of balance.
Show?
I mean, the research shows that most kids aren't doing it, but some kids are. What the research shows, sorry, what did you say?
Why are they delaying sexual intercourse till older?
I mean, we don't know everything about that, but it might be because they're like home looking at porn and sexting instead. I mean, it could be because they're just playing video games, hanging out less in person. Like, there's all kinds of reasons. Kids in general are out of the house less. They're driving later. There are people who think that that's only because of digital. I think there's all kinds of reasons, including that there's fewer public spaces that are welcoming to kids. There are fewer jobs, like my own 15-year-old wants a job this summer. I'm like, good luck, buddy. Like, it's really hard to find a job for a 15-year-old right now. There's not as much opportunity. It should be a sort of young adult at that age. And that's going to delay, for some kids starting intimate relationships. And I mean, we might think that's a good thing. And certainly I think, it depends on the kid's age. I mean, if your kid is in middle school, I think most of us are like, of course, that's a good thing. If your kid is in college, and they're, have yet to even talk to someone romantically, for some adults, that's concerning. Like, it seems late. So I think there's a huge range of what's going on out there. And I'm not really here to say like when our kids should start falling in love or dating or having sex. I think that's obviously very personal to them and very personal to every family. But when you see like, marriage getting delayed and all these things, it's like, these are real questions about, how is it all going to go? And I don't have all the answers to that, but I do think that sexting fills parents with anxiety. I wish the laws made more of a distinction between, for example, a photo of a teenager that's made by an adult predator versus a photo of a teenager made willingly and consensually by themselves that either stays private, because some kids will take pictures on their own devices that they don't even share. They just kind of want to see how they look. All the way to kids, unfortunately getting shared without their consent. And what happens when that happens is very violating, right? Like if a picture goes around school, and just thinking again about athletic culture and sports culture, one of the stories you hear sometimes, and one of the stories I've heard at numerous high schools, unfortunately, is like a picture maybe of a young woman going around a team of young men, and they're all like sharing the picture. And that is a very problematic way of, in some ways, like they're reinforcing their social power, but in a misogynist way. And that's not good. And I think it's really important. And again, I think, my book goes into, for example, like non-binary kids and queer kids and all these scenarios. So I don't want to like put this totally heterosexual cis frame on everyone, but I will say like when that happens, I do think coaches and other leaders of young men need to really lean into not just like, oh, you got caught, but like what's going on about respecting other people's humanity and their boundaries and their privacy. it's not, and really, really interrogating the culture of misogyny that's promulgating, as opposed to just being like, you got caught, you're in trouble, you have to miss a game because we found out you had whatever, nudes on your phone. I think it has to really go deeper and focus on the humanity of everyone. And again, this is true, for girls, for non-binary kids, for queer kids. It's not just about heterosexual cis kids, but when we see photos going around without consent, it is often photos of girls circulated by boys in a way that is very harmful.
And speaking of all of that, then makes me think about pornography, and we know that it's younger and younger. Can you speak to the data about, because these kids are on devices much earlier, when is pornography becoming an issue? When are they exposing it, and what are the downstream effects of that?
Yeah, and I can link to a really great organization that I wrote about in the book as well. I can give you for the show notes, that does a lot of work about preventing and also responding to the culture of pornography. But we know that some kids' first exposure is like at 9 or 10. So even if you think that's probably not your kid, I think it's really worth having that conversation younger than you think. And just, it's a different conversation with an elementary schooler than it is with older kids. And the best inoculation against pornography, especially at a younger age, is really good informative sex education. So the more our kids know, the less they're likely to, their whole lives.
Starting at 9 or 10. Yeah.
Oh, starting at 4 or 5. Kids need, whenever you're teaching kids what their elbows and knees are, you need to teach them about all of the parts of their body. Like there's no beginning and end. Having a body, is like when your kid is taking a bath when they're 2, is like, there's no sort of too young. That's not when you're telling them necessarily about like sex between people, but you're teaching them how to talk about their own anatomy in a way that for the rest of their life is going to keep them safer and healthier.
And what's the name of that organization that you wrote about?
Let me send you the link.
Okay, that'd be great. And we'll definitely put it in the show notes. And then speak about it when you get into teenage years and what we're seeing with male performance and female performance because of porn. What is that doing to them mentally?
It's very concerning that, there's a lot of pressure. Kids, in some cases, and adults too, feel like they have to do things they don't want to do, or, in terms of acts that they might not be actually interested in or don't really enjoy or take pleasure from. So that veers a little bit out of my core expertise, but there's some really great books about sort of the culture of pornography and what it does to kids. And it's tricky. Like for those of us who really believe in a free and open internet, I think pornography is one of those things. And I identify with that. Like I do think the internet should, I'm not pro censorship at this. And this is where I get really troubled when people try to take young adult books off the shelves that talk about sex or sexuality. Cause I'm like, literally your kid could be in another room. Like people are banning a book with a love scene where 2 kids like kiss or make out. And then your kid could be in another room watching like incredibly violent sexual acts between actors who may or may not have consented. Like we don't know when we see pornography, like were these people paid? Were they safe when it was made? Like, is this something they chose to do? Like, yes, in some cases, but not always. Sometimes we're watching actual assault or trafficking happening in front of our eyes. So like, we need to talk to kids about that without scaring them. And I think we need to also have a non-shame based conversation where we can say, look, it's typical to be curious about sexuality. It's typical to want to know how things work. Makes sense to, like everyone has sexual feelings. And a lot of people are really curious about what it looks like when people do sexual things together or by themselves, right? But this is not how I want you to learn about this and get into the reasons why, because it's not, but we don't want to make kids feel bad for being curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we want them to ask good questions and get more information, right? So when something goes wrong, what I hear the stories a lot around, so-and-so sent a video and then everybody's talking about it at school and then all the parents are talking about it. What's the right action to take? I think parents get confused as to, should I get involved? It didn't involve my kids, so I should just stay out of it. What do you advise?
I think talking to kids, like, hey, like I heard, something went around, asking them, like, how are you feeling? Does that make you feel unsafe? Do you feel, like weird about it? Like just kind of trying to understand how your kid is doing, and you know your child or your young adult well. Like, are they someone who's good at setting boundaries? Do they struggle with that? Do they struggle with impulsivity? I think it's really important to just be the person your kid can talk to.
Asking them to share with you from their point of view so you can learn about it.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So wrapping this all up, and the book, yeah, I'll have to read the book because it goes into each one of these really deeply and helps you understand, and depending on what ages your kids are, it's interesting how it morphs. I'm now at the back end of that. I have 23, 20, and 18, but still having variations of a lot of these issues and wanting to help my kids navigate all of this stuff, which I didn't have growing up. So it is kind of new ground for both sides, right? For parents and kids,
Yeah.
to learn how to navigate this. So we're
I
learning
put the
as we
link
go.
in
And
the
at this,
chat. Culture Reframed. I put the link in the chat. So
oh,
that's a
good.
good resource.
Oh, okay, fabulous. So kind of as a takeaway, Devorah, like what are the big ideas that you would like parents to walk away with? And, sports aside, just as helping our kids navigate growing up in public.
I think we really want to be empathetic with living in a world that has kind of a gotcha culture, and we don't want to be part of that culture. We don't want to be sharing other people's mistakes, things that we think are problematic. At the same time, like if we see something happening that's problematic, we could talk about it with our kids later. We don't want to like video it and amplify it, but we could say, oh, I found that troubling or whatever, because we want to talk to our kids about also what we like and what we respect. If we notice an athlete or a public figure of any kind that your kid really likes and admires, who has a really positive social media presence, that might be a good person to follow.
Great. And what other thoughts or final words of advice you'd have for parents of athletes, and as they're helping their kids navigate, if their dream is to play at the next level, what would be the biggest things for them to keep in mind?
I think just making sure that they can balance, friends versus followers, and that public presence or that public fan base, or, their life as like a slightly public person in your community or whatever, is balanced with understanding their reciprocal friendships, and that they're, that they matter and count in your family in a completely different way, and that their sort of performance out there is not the most important thing to you. Like what count, their kindness, their showing up, they're doing their chores and just being part of the family and like pulling their weight in the home is what matters. And just being them, that you appreciate them for who they are. Because even our kids who are maybe very serious about something, unfortunately, we all know stories of someone who either was derailed by an injury or they just lose interest. So I think it's very important that kids don't see their self-worth only through the lens of whatever, their sport is, because few of us are lucky enough to have that be our whole life. Right. So, I mean, I have so many friends,
Yes.
I'm in my late 40s. I have so many friends who were dancers, and there are some of them who are still dancing professionally, but, they need to see their worth in other ways. Like we need to see ourselves counting and mattering in the world in other ways. And that's true for anyone. And to show
well
up
said.
for
And what
their friends. Yeah. In that way, like to really be there for others as well.
Yes. And whether you're an artist or an athlete or a scientist or, whatever your focus is, I think one of the biggest gifts we can give our kids is knowing that they matter far beyond whatever that one thing is that they happen to do well right now. This might be something they do for the next 5 or 10 years, or they might pivot away from it tomorrow. And your value is not about that. It's about who you are as a human.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And I've seen, like, my son actually stopped doing martial arts for now with high school and the demands of high school. And he got through all the way through his black belt in the summer and then had to stop. And we've talked a lot about how much it was really great, and he doesn't have to do it anymore if he can't find the time. And like, it really doesn't work for our family anymore. Any of us, like, we could not make it work. But it was just like, oh, you don't have to do this forever to have had a really great experience, to have learned from it, to have, internalized the values of it. And like, those will always be with him.
Yes. And he may do tangent off of that and do something,
Absolutely. But it's just like what you learn about yourself from doing any particular thing. I mean, I was, as a little kid, an ice skater, and I was never on a really hardcore track, to be clear, but I was like getting badges and taking lessons and sort of continuing, doing recitals and like, I have no regrets. Like, it was great. And I haven't done it in years, but I still feel really warm about it. Right. And so I just think we want kids to have that feeling, even if they are more serious or more whatever, like giving up more to do it, like whatever. We want them to look back on these years also as like, this was a positive thing.
Right? Yeah. What about that F word? Fun. Yeah. It's supposed to be fun.
Yes.
Yeah. And we need to keep that in it. So Devorah, for people listening, where can they find you if they want to have you come speak at their school or to their company, or find you online and get some great tools we mentioned at the top, but let's mention them again.
Yeah, so Growing Up in Public is available everywhere books are sold, and DevorahHeitner.com, my website, is a great place to sign up for my semi-regular email newsletter, which is like informative for parents and helps you hopefully navigate all this stuff. My social media is at Devorah Heitner, Ph.D. I'm mostly on Instagram for social and a little bit on LinkedIn these days.
Well, thank you so much for making time. This is so enlightening. I know parents have a ton of questions about this, and it's something we need to navigate and embrace, and again, help our kids so that they can learn from their mistakes and try things and grow, because that's what this whole journey is about. Thanks, parents.
Absolutely.
Grab a copy of Growing Up in Public today and Raising Empowered Athletes. Let's do this.
Hi everybody, Matt here for the outro. We just watched Kirsten and Devorah going deep on our children growing up in the public eye. And Devorah Heitner is an author and professor. She's actually living where I currently am in Chicago, so another Chicago local. And a lot of what they talked about got me thinking about my childhood and how I was raised. And so yeah, it was really exciting to see Kirsten and Devorah kind of going deep on what I experienced growing up, which I don't think a lot of generations before me, if any, were really, they weren't exposed to the whole world from the jump. Some of us as kids started to get smartphones from a very young age, pictures taken at all times. The social media landscape was something that no other generation has ever experienced. And I think Devorah does a very, very good job of breaking down where, we need to be very conscious of how our kids are being affected by this, but also we don't have to completely raise alarm bells quite yet, throw the phones away and go back to the prehistoric age. I think she was a very realistic understanding of this is what the world we live in now, and what we have to do is give our kids tools for how to handle it. If they post something, if they make a mistake, it is, it's what they have to live with, and they have to learn from these experiences, and kids should be given the opportunity and the space to learn. And I think Devorah does a very good job of breaking down where parents have to be much more conscious, but also teaching kids and having a realistic mindset of, what is going to affect them and how they're going to be affected. So, for me growing up, I noticed a huge amount of kids around me, including myself, being on social media from a young age. We didn't really understand this. I can tell you my parents didn't really understand it either. They did not understand the everything that was going on, and I don't think that parents in my age, because it was so new and so fresh, I think Instagram was only a couple years old when I was in the 6th or 7th grade when I first got it, and it was just completely the world of the unknown. And handing kids smartphones at such a young age, it gives your kid access to the world in the palm of their hand, and also the world access to them. Now, that doesn't mean that your kids can't handle this. It doesn't mean that you have to completely throw the phones out, but setting up tools and mechanisms to allow them to grow into the person that they want to be without making too many mistakes, and understanding that actions do have consequences, and how to handle this, and how to handle a smartphone and social media and the pressures that come with it. I think Devorah did an excellent job, and for me it was a great experience being able to watch these two go back and forth and talk about something that is so integral to everybody's life and has been so integral to my life growing up. So, give this a listen. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for bearing with me on this new take on just me doing the outro. Kirsten will be back with us next week. She was traveling, so hope you enjoyed.